Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create flowers in watercolor. We're going to do some drills on petals and leaf shapes and some techniques of how to study flowers. And then I'm going to be doing this little spring colorful flower bouquet. So if you'd like to join in, please do. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, or share if you find this content helpful. Thank you. Let's get started. So we're going to be doing florals today. It's whether you're already into spring or it feels like spring outside or you're approaching it. I know when I lived in Minnesota, we still had more winter storms in April because April's when my birthday is. And so I was always frustrated by that. So some of you are just longing for spring, like real spring, and some of you are there. So I thought since we're approaching that, florals would be a great subject for today. And I wanted to give you some tips on practicing or thinking about florals to start with. So these are some pictures that I've taken on hikes or whatnot, and I just wanted to show you some samples of different flower shapes. And I'm going to show you some ways to do drills to practice doing florals, and then we're going to do some practices, and then we'll do a project. So that's kind of the process for today. So I wanted to have you guys take a look at this. If you guys want to do studies on florals, it's a good idea to really take a look at a flower in all its different angles. Okay, so this is a bud, and this is unfolding from the side, and this is looking at from the top. When we think of a particular flower, oftentimes we think of the shape that we see looking straight down on the flower. But in reality, if we're looking at a bouquet, for example, or creating a collage of flowers, they're not all going to be facing necessarily towards the viewer. So it's important to recognize the shapes. So one way that I find that's easier to do that is to create the photo and also create it in black and white. You can look at the values in black and white, and sometimes that takes away a little of the distraction of all the color. And then you can start seeing the shapes, because basically everything is just a series of shapes, and it's just a matter of figuring out the shape that you're working on. So if we look at the shape of this particular flower, the outline of it isn't like a flower, it's more like a teardrop, right? Because this is a bud. And so I encourage you to, with a pencil, go ahead and mark the shape of the different tones of the flower. And if you break this down even further, I actually have software that does that. This helps even further break down the shapes, especially if you want to do the value study. You can actually, with editing software, break it up into a grayscale that is a certain number of shades. So I did this in Photoshop Elements. And if you want to learn that, how to do that, I don't know what other softwares do, but I can show you the process in Photoshop Elements. But what I love about this is that this actually breaks down all of my shapes in the different values. So I can actually go in and say, okay, I've got this dark shape or this dark value is this shape. And I kind of get an idea of what I'm going to try to do with that color value. So that's a little bit more advanced, but I want you to be aware that that's something that you can do if you want to really study and follow the realism of the flower. Now we're going to be more loose about it, but it still helps you see where the lightest values are, where the medium values are, and the darkest and darker values are. And you can start to see the patterns of the shapes of what things look like. So this particular flower arrangement, it's really hard to see the shapes in this with all the color. But when you break it down into the gradients of grayscale, I can really see how the shapes develop in those different values. So that helps you to put those layers on top of the darker and darker. Now with watercolor, you typically go from light to dark. So we start by the lightest value, and then we fill in the darker values. So you can start with creating, for example, in this particular project, we have some really light value right here that's almost white, actually. It's a really, really pale pink. So I could do this whole shape in this really pale, pale pink. And then I can create the shapes of these petals by using darker and darker values to carve them out. And so when you outline these shapes with a pencil, you start to learn, what am I actually creating here? What's the shape that I am creating with my brush? Once you understand the shapes that you're working with, you can learn how to maneuver and manipulate your paintbrush to get those shapes. But each time you have a different color, different value, you're bringing in a new shape potentially. Okay, so that I would encourage you to try that out. Print out some flowers that you have, take pictures of flowers, see what kind of shapes you come up with, do the outline so you really understand the shapes of these different types of flowers. Now with white, it's more challenging because we have to leave the white alone, use the paper color behind to get those brightest whites. And then we use grayscale to fill in to create the shape. So we use those background, those negative space behind to carve out the shape of this particular flower. So white can be the most challenging to do. So when we look at the grayscale version, you can really see all of these shapes that are in gray. And then again, that negative space behind it really carves out the shape of it. But it would be really hard to see this against a lighter background. But there's ways you can do it. Just have a little bit of gray, shaping out that flower. So that's what I would suggest to do, to start studying flower shapes. And you'll realize that even when you imagine the flower like this, it may be tilted at various angles. So for example, when we want to draw this, we think of this in the center, but really look, it's off center. It's got more longer petals over here and shorter petals up here, just because of the angle that we're looking at it. Maybe these petals are coming up at us more than these ones are. So really looking at it, this is off center. These petals are just really stubby. If we drew this from our mind, we would probably try to make all these petals equidistant from the center, but depending on the angle we're looking at it, it may not be that way. So just be aware. We want to just incorporate all of those different angles. Oh, I have this up. All the different angles that you might come across in a flower. So, and they're not perfect. Sometimes they have notches out of them. Sometimes there's a fold. So let it be a little bit more loose. Don't try to make it really symmetrical. The more messy or less symmetrical it is, the more organic it's going to look, the more natural it's going to look, because that's the reality. We're not always looking at it straight on, and it's not always perfect. These are like straight down at these, and they do look more symmetrical. So some of them will be, and some of them won't be. So play around with that. Okay. Let's play around with petal shapes and how to do it. Now I have this really inexpensive paper. Let me just back this up so you can see what I'm using. This is just, I use for practice because I don't want to waste my, my better paper. So this is only a 90 pound, and it's not going to look like what it would look like on if I was using my cotton paper or a higher thickness. But that's what I use to do drills and practices on. So I'm just going to do some of those on here. Now I'm using my size 8. This is a Blick Master Sable, Kolinsky Sable, which is one of the higher end natural brushes. And be aware that that does impact if you're using a brush, for example, that is like, this is a cheaper brush. This is a Dick Blick Master Stroke. And it is a natural, it looks like a natural fiber. I don't know what it is, but, and when it's wet, it's all bushy. But when when it's dry, it's all bushy. But when I wet it, what I wanted to do, if I have a good round brush, is I wanted to come to a point. And see, this doesn't really come to a nice sharp point. This comes to a very blunt point. even when I try to push these hairs together, it's just not coming to a nice sharp point. So this one would be more difficult to get the effect that I can get with this one. Now they have great synthetic brushes that also come to a nice point. This, for example, oh no, that's another staple. Where did that one go? Oh, this one. Yeah. This, for example, is a Blickmaster, and this one, it comes to a really nice point. You can see that. And this is a synthetic. So there are some great, the Teflon Gold are really, there's some great quality brushes out there that are synthetic if you want to be, you know, cruelty free. And the challenges with that is synthetic also creates bad environment things, but we won't get into that. Okay, so I'm going to just show you the difference between these different brushes, so you know what to expect depending on what you have. I'm not trying to sell anything, although I do, on my master list of supplies online, I do have links. Whatever I could find online, I link to more information about it. I put it on there, so you can find some of these there. Okay, so I'm going to start with this one. This is a natural. It looks like. I don't know what kind of hair it is. It doesn't say, but I want to show you the difference between this and the other. So first, I'm going to wet my palette with a spritzer, get my colors to start activating. And when you're first starting out, don't worry about colors. Just pick a color. If you're just doing drills and things, just pick one color so you don't have to worry about thinking about color. I'm just going to use this cadmium red deep. All right. So what I want to be able to do with a round brush is I want to be able to create a really fine point with the tip. So when you touch just the tip, you should get a nice fine point. And then when you push down using the body of the bristles, then you get a nice wide point. So I'm just going to lightly touch, and then I'm going to press down, and then I'm going to bring it up. Now you'll notice I can't really get a very fine point on this one. Maybe if I go from the side, now that I've sort of smashed them down, maybe I can, nope, I still can't really get a very good point. Okay. So if you have a brush that's like this, that doesn't come to a nice fine point, what you can do is just get a smaller brush and do a point with the smaller brush at the ends when we do these petals or leaves. Let me show you what it looks like when you use a brush that actually can come to a tip. Now this is the synthetic. The great thing about synthetics are they are very firm. They tend to hold their shape, so they snap back. What can happen with some of the natural is, this is a squirrel, is when you push it, the bristles can sometimes stay bent. So they just don't snap back as easily, but these do. But they don't hold as much paint. So you run out of paint a little bit quicker. Now this is, again, the synthetic, getting a nice amount of paint. Now I'm going to start again very lightly with my tip. Now I can press down, and then I'm going to slowly lift up. And I can get a pretty fine point. Okay, and then now I'm going to show you with the sable to just lightly touch my tip down, and then I'm going to press and lift. And you can come to a really nice point, as you can see. So that's what we want to do with these petals. So I'm going to start with doing like what would be like a tulip type. Now I don't know the names of flowers, so that's not my skill set. And you can do it one of two ways. You can start with the belly of the brush, like kind of laying the brush down sideways, and you can push up. and then come to a point that way. Or if you want it to be thinner at the bottom, you can start with the tip and then press down to get the thick petal. So see how I did a reverse teardrop, and then I did a teardrop. So depending on where you want it to be thin and where you want it to be thick, you can just lift up the brush quick so you don't get that skinny part. If I lift up it slowly and I drag, you're going to get that fine petal. So if I start with the tip and then I press and then I lift up slow, I'm going to get a point. If I start off with the tip and then I press and then I lift up quick, I get a teardrop. And then if I rotate it around, I can get like more like a kind of like an ear shape. So I encourage you to practice these with whatever brush you have. Let me show you this with that first brush. Now, whenever I go into the water and dry my brush, when I rinse my brush, I have a dirty and a clean. I rotate this on my towel so I can keep, and I kind of pull it down so I keep that point. I want to really protect the point, especially of my natural brushes. The synthetic keeps its shape pretty well. Okay, so now I'm going to use this one and let's see what I can do. I don't know, this one's going to be a little bit trickier, but this might be more likely what you have if you're an ultra beginner. You haven't invested in, you know, sometimes paint kits come with something in it. I don't even know where I got this, but just work with what you have. So you have to just really be very careful not to press too hard and try to just get a little bit of, and then you can press it down and you can still get the shape. It's not bad. And then do this sideways because now I press this a little bit flat. So now if I go sideways, I might get an even sharper point. And then if you don't like how the end is, you can manipulate it all you want. This one holds a ton of paint though, I'll give it that. That's the thing about the naturals is they're very porous, so they hold a lot of paint. So you can always go back in and shape it however you need to. If you, for example, don't get the sharpest point at the end, just use a smaller brush and then pull it down to get if you really want to have that point, you can always just pull it down afterwards. Okay, another leaf shape might be, you might want some longer, like a daisy. Now keep in mind that wherever the center of the flower is, because the petals should always go towards that. So if I'm doing a daisy, for example, I'm going to start right at angling my brush. Let me get this closer again. I'm going to angle my brush towards that center. Press, and then I'm going to lift. And I just see however long I want the petal to be. Now, if I want that to be a wider petal, I can just do a second line. And I leave a little space in between just to give it a little bit of interest, a little highlight, if you will. Press and then up. And don't make them all exactly the same. Make them a little different shapes. I can vary them by changing color, adding color, or changing the shapes, changing the value, making them lighter, darker. So there's lots of ways to change up the flower to give it some dimension. Now this can be one of those, again, I wish I knew the names of flowers, but something like one of these guys where it has the big bulb on the top. So now I can just, with a different color, I can just pop in that shape, and there you go. The other thing you can do is just be random. Just create kind of a however many petals. Again, coming towards the center, I'm just shaping this, and then this is the center of my flower. So I'm just laying down the, oops, I'm not even showing you guys, sorry. Let's try that again. Now this time I'm gonna be angling this towards the center. So this is the center of the flower, and I'm angling my brush this way because I'm letting my tip be out there. So I'm just creating 3 petals. And then this is the center. So you can either do it this way or this way, just making sure that your brush is angled towards the center point. And then if I want another petal in there. But vary the petals and vary the color and everything. Now this paper, because it's kind of cheaper, what you'll find is if it's got a lot of sizing in it, you'll get these petals. And these can be kind of annoying. You might want those, you might want to have the light here and the dark up here. But if you don't like it, you can just move that paint around, because it just means that there's probably a lot of sizing if you're using a cellulose-based paper. And so it's just not absorbing as quickly as another paper might. So just be aware of that and just move the pigment around wherever you want it. Now, if I want this fuller, I can just even add more shapes in there. Maybe I just want little filler flowers. So again, create a V shaped towards that center. I'm gonna mark the center so you guys can see. So I can create these little flowers. Maybe I want some of them to have 3. Sometimes you see 3 petals, sometimes you don't see 3 petals depending on the angle. So you could just make a little softer. So just, you can make a little spray of flowers. And then I'm going to use the same color just to simplify. And then you can do your stems with the very tip, or you can use a smaller brush if you don't have a fine brush. It is really important when you are doing the stems to have a nice fine tip, because it's really, really hard to get those details if I use this other one. Let me show you, let me give you an example. And this is a bigger brush, so obviously if this was a smaller brush, it would be better. It would be more helpful. But I can't get a very fine. I have to really almost like try to brush. That's not bad. I'm doing like a wispy, kind of like just trying to barely like touch it. So if you do that, you might be able to get a decent stem. And then to do the stems, follow along the stem line, the main stem line, and then go out from the side. So when you're going up, follow it and then go out. That makes sense. Follow the line and then come out. It doesn't stick out parallel, it doesn't stick out perpendicular to the line. You want to follow the direction. Make it look natural. Okay. Other shapes. I'm going to show you a rose. Roses are, because all of these are basically similar shapes, just you just do a little bit different movements. So for a rose or a peony or anything that's one of those flowers that are kind of, you know, lots of petals around, you can just make a bunch of C's. So you're going to start off in the center with a little bit of a C, and then you're just going to, and I like to rotate the page, although it's, I don't have a lot of space here, because I'm going to move my water so I can have space, because I think it's easier to do it this way. If you really have good manual dexterity, you can rotate your hand, but it's sometimes really hard to do that evenly. So I like to rotate. So all I'm going to do, and I'll show you the move that I'm making. I'm going to make a C. So it's going to be really fine. I'm going to press down, and then I'm going to drag and lift and create these little C's all the way around, starting from smaller to bigger. And if this brush, I'm able to do a variety of sizes with because it's versatile. But if you don't have a good brush that goes to a really fine tip, then just change out your brushes, go from small to big. Now I don't want these to touch. I want to leave some white space between them, and I want to stagger them kind of like bricks. Like I don't want the openings all to be at the same space. And again, it's just putting all that pigment all at the end. And then as you move out, you can start making bigger C's. Just touch, press, drag, lift. And you can start making them as big as you want. If you want them real big, you can kind of rotate the brush a little bit to arc them out more. And then you can keep going as big as you want. Now, we'll talk about the details more, but I mean, that gives you the general shape. And then later you can go in and add your different values. You can soften up edges by just taking a clean brush and running it along the edge to kind of loosen that up if you want to bring it out. This paper, like I said, isn't, nothing's moving. Or you can even just soften, if you want to soften the white, you just take a clean brush and just, you can run it around the whole thing if you want. Just a soft, you know, soften up those white lines. You can do that. Okay, what other shapes? There's also, let's do a rose, like a bud, rose bud. And that's just basically kind of round at the bottom. Okay, so that's the general shape of the rose. And then once it dries, we can actually create the definition of the petals. But you're just trying to get the outline. You can do all the details afterwards. And then also, what are some other shapes? You can even do little, I wish I knew the name. Other ones, they're just like little, almost like little hairs. You just flick the brush up. And then I would put the green stem down here and the stem. So, and then you can also create like a lavender or kind of something that's on more of a vine just by, get this in the frame, just by tapping down and going lighter, making like a column. Then you would just put the stem, a couple little pieces of the stem in there. I wouldn't make it that. It would be a different color and those would blend. Just focusing on shapes. Let's do just broad petals. Okay, so this is my center. And I'm just going to lean my brush towards the center. And then I made one half of the petal, and then now I'm going to go up a little bit and bring it around the other way. And if I want it wider than that, I could even do a third one. So depending on how wide you want your petal to be, you just bring it up 1, 2, 3, 4 times if you want. And then rotate the page because I think it's easier. Like I said, I don't have the dexterity to angle towards the center. But if you do, good for you. Okay, so back towards the center. Now I'm leaving white space between the petals in this case. You can have them touch, but I like to leave a little, sometimes I'll have them touch and sometimes I won't. So it's going to vary. But it's nice to kind of show the difference between the petals, have that space there. The natural brush holds a lot more pigment, so I don't have to go to my palette as frequently. So if you do have to go back, that's okay. If you're using a synthetic, that's just the nature of that. And this I want to fill in a little bit more. So, I mean, I can really, there we go, play around with it until it looks like what I like. Actually, I want this one to come out a little bit more this way. There we go. And I encourage you to just do these drills, you know, practice these shapes before you put them into a project until you start to feel comfortable with them. This one. I'm going to go ahead and touch the other leaf. All right, so there's a 5-leaf flower. And this could be lots of different things, just depending on the color and what details that you put in, you know, how big the petals are. So, you know, these can go a long way. Again, this could be a rose or a peony, depending on the details. So play around with these different petals. Now I'm going to show you a leaf. And the difference between a leaf and a petal, here, I'll show you a petal, an example of a longer petal. This one's a point. I'm waiting for a pointed tip. And then that could be a flower petal, but if you make it green, suddenly it's a leaf. Basically the same shapes, just variations. You can make them more S's, S-shaped, you can make them more straight. So now, same thing, pressing, lifting, and then I go to the other side, press and lift, and there I have my leaf. So, and then I can add details later, you know, as it dries. I can make it wider by doing another side. I can make it jagged by just pushing out. Let's see, the right shape or the right I can make it kind of like more like a rose leaf just by creating little jagged edges. So that's the start of just about any leaf, and then you just change up some of the other details. And then you can make it as S-curved if you want. Let's see, this one. Long. Maybe I want to do a blade of grass. Make sure I'm on the screen. That would help. Okay. I could even turn it if I want. And then lift. So you can make a lot of different things with just this one technique. Just vary the thickness, the number of strokes that you do, how much you taper from one end to the other. So this is a great technique to practice to do just about anything, any plants, any leaves or flowers or whatnot. Okay. Now, let's put it all together. Actually, oh, I want to show you ferns because it's always nice if you're going to do a floral to maybe add a fern. And you can use this for a flower that's got the petals like this too, but you can do it a couple different ways. Let me find some space here. Now I'm going to imagine that the fern is kind of going like this. So just imagine, have an imaginary line. Just drag it a little bit further as you go down. Now I'm just like practically stamping. I'm not even doing the drag, but you could do the drag technique too. It might give you a little bit more control. And even when you add your stems, don't have the stem one solid line, lift it and kind of drop it down so it looks a little bit more delicate. Okay, so I'm going to do another variation where I actually just mostly use the tip. Time I am going to drag it. I want more shape control. Doesn't look like much control, does it? Let's skip that one. Let me try that again. Then you can also start at the beginning and then push and then come out with a tip. I think I like that better. It's easier, I think, to lift to a tip than it is to, let me go over here and do that again. I think it's easier to lift to the tip than start the tip. So you can create all sorts of fun, different floral pieces that can go in the middle. All right. So I encourage you to play around, do some drills, some leaves and petal drills to practice. And one thing that you can do when you're prepared to do your project is go back to that original, those original pictures. Bring this up a little bit. And now that you kind of have an idea of what you're going to be doing, you can go in and see, okay, what am I going to like make a plan for what you're going to do for a particular flower. So this, for example, is very similar to this flower that we did. So you can actually take your brush if you're not, depending on the size that you're going to be working on, but you can practice following the shape of that flower with your brush. And have a plan, like say, okay, I'm going to leave this open, and later I'm going to fill in some of this low lights in there. But right now I'm just trying to create this shape. This one, if you want to start and you don't want a point to start with, you want a blunt start, like this one, there is no point really. I want it to be more blunt. I'm just going to start with the belly of my brush. And how I do that is start at the side. And I'm going to push sideways. So that makes kind of more of a broader shape. If I'm trying to make it more, and then I can kind of create this ruffly, these ruffles, the ruffle shapes by drawing with the tip. All right. And again, there's like this, for example, has a lot of rufflies to it. But you can do the rufflies with the tip, just drawing those in later. Doesn't have to be your first step. Like I could draw, if I wanted to have some ruffly designs in here, I can add that as part of my details that I do. Just softening that. So you can do the details later. Just get the general shape to start with and then build layer on layer. Okay. Now I'm going to be working on the project, the composition. I'm just going to create a little bouquet, well, of flowers. And oops, I'm just cleaning up my brushes that I'm not going to be using. Always a good idea to clean your brushes. Right away. These are watercolors, but they still can damage the fibers of the brush if you let the paint dry in there. And the other thing that can happen is when you go to paint something else later on, if that color is in there, it can be surprising. It's like, oh, there's still color in there. So make sure to clean your brushes real good. I usually rinse them all afterwards under the sink too. I clean them in the water here, but then afterwards I run them under the sink to make sure it's good, clean water. Okay. Now I want to bring this up. You can see water. I have my dirty water, my clean water, my diaper, cloth diaper. I know those are things. I think they're still available somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and tape down my paper. This is 4 by 6. I decided to start doing bigger just because I think it's easier for you guys to see. I used to do the little tiny ones, 3 by 4s, but I find that the details can be hard to see when I'm doing that small. So I decided to try doing them a little bit bigger. So hopefully that'll help.
Shauna, this is Mary. I forgot what paint you use. Are you using?
I use the M Gram is my favorite. Some of these, I think I have a few in here that aren't M Gram, but most of my palette is M Gram. And what I like about them, M Gram, is that it has a honey base, so it stays really moist. The one challenge with them is if you do a travel palette, they can run a little bit because they stay somewhat, I wouldn't say wet, but they stay kind of like honey texture, They lift really nice and I like the vibrancy of the color. And that's one of the reasons I like them so much. But I have found when I try to store my palette on its side, it would travel a little bit. Not as bad as, not quite as thin as honey is, but just like a slow movement, like the blob. Okay.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Now I like to tape it down on a surface that I can move around. Some people tape it right onto their workspace, but then I can't rotate it. And since like I said, I don't have the dexterity to angle, and try to get my stems real well. So I like to be able to rotate my page. So I recommend taping it onto a different surface that you can move around. Now, I tape it down in part to help keep it from curling up. It helps to keep it from, warping as much. So I do that. And then I also like to have a border around the picture. So this creates a nice straight edge around the painting itself. Okay. Now I'm going to use probably this as my guide, sort of loosely. I like this little design, and it doesn't have a lot of colors. I do recommend, especially if you're a beginner, to limit your color palette. It's going to be a lot easier because you don't have to you don't have to worry about muddying things up. Now, one of the challenges with any foliage is that green is opposite on the color wheel as red. Now, this is a pink, which is a variation of red. And so whenever you mix complementary colors, they mute each other out. Okay, so you do have to be careful to not let them mingle too much to keep the green and the red separate. Especially don't work on it when it's wet unless you want the green to mix a little bit. Now, sometimes I like to have the green mix a little bit at the base because it just gives a little bit of a muted gray tone or it mutes the color a little bit, and it's not too much. But if you get too much mixing, you could end up with mud. So just be careful and be aware of that. So if you pick things that are close together on the color wheel, like red, purple, blue, I would say either do red, purple, blue like this direction because purple is a mix of the blue and the red, or I would move in the warm direction of red, yellow, orange. If you try to do the yellow with the blues, then you might start, having more challenges. But if you do mix those together, then just keep them separate. They look great together. For example, this one has, I think this is this looks a little yellow over here. Most of these are a peachy pink, and then it's got some purple. So this one doesn't have a lot of, yeah, I thought this one had yellow in it, but it doesn't really have any yellow. It's just mostly this peachy pink color, and then a little bit of purple in there. Now the peachy pink is on the warmer side, and the purple, the blue purple, is a nice contrast to that. But again, just be aware, they're nice. They look to get great together because they're contrasting, but just be careful not to mix and mingle them too much on the page, or you're going to get muddy colors. So let's see, I'm going to put this, and I'm just using this as a loose, I'm not trying to make this exactly, I'm just using this as a loose guide of what I want to do. And it's nice to have some kind of guide. Otherwise, you can just randomly put stuff anywhere. I mean, really, just start laying down flowers at various places and then fill it in. You can always do the fillers later. Okay. Now, if at this point, one way, like I said, to mix it up and give it dimension is to vary the colors. So what I could do is I'm going to stay on the cooler side of things, but I can go in and I can mix a little bit more of this, or I could maybe add a little bit of purple. So I can stay in, these 4 colors, but I can just go in and change it up each time just to give it a little bit of variation. So for example, I might go ahead and just put some of that on my palette. I'm going to put a little bit of, this is more of a rosy red color. This is a little bit warmer red, but I don't want to go quite into the yellows. So I'm going to stick with blues, purples, reds, just to keep it simple. And then I'm going to add, and this is kind of like, a blue. It's blue and red mixed. So I'm going to put that in there. Just so I can go grab a little bit as I'm working. Mix it up. Okay. And then for starters, I want it to be a lighter. I'm just mapping out where things are. And then creating some shapes that are going to be hinting at what I'm going to do there. But I'm just kind of mapping it out. So there's a flower, there's a rose over here. And there's a lighter rose up there. Matter of fact, I might even add some, I'm going to bring some white in so I can get these lighter peach colors too. Here, there's a little bit of a rose. And then this one is overlapping this rose, so I don't want to lay this down while this is still wet. I just want to let that dry, and then I will work on this flower afterwards. There's something up here that's kind of spiky, so I'm just putting this shape in. And then there's a rose over here. easy when you do really small because you don't have to have a lot of the detail. Then there's another big rose over here. And then there's these big. Easter lilies or something. I don't know what those are exactly. Here. And see that this one doesn't go down. So it's just like a little stubby shape down here. And then there's another rose over here that kind of overlaps that, but I'm going to put it over a little bit. And then I don't have a lot of room for this flower. I'm just going to kind of put something going off the page that way. And then another, I don't know, told you I don't know flowers. Now I'm going to pay attention to the center here. Center is here, but it's offset. I've got little stubbies on this side. It's going to draw, I'm just mapping in the shape. And then they kind of stick further out on this side. All right, and then I have some purpley numbers over here. And then here. I'm going to just keep that purple look. You know, these ones are kind of pink. Creative license. Right, now I'm going to go in with a little bit darker shade and I'm going to just touch in some details. Now, some of these are going to be still wet and that's okay. I don't mind if there's some bleeding and some of them are not going to be as wet. So I'm just going to play around with it and see what happens. I just want to use the very tips. I just want some details. So I want to bring in some low lights. So I'm just going to create more of these C shapes with a darker color.
Shauna, can you zoom in a little bit on your, thank you.
Recenter my I'm just lightly touching in. Now, I'm not trying to follow this exactly. If I was really trying to, do realism, I would maybe follow each of these, but I'm just touching it in. I'm doing really loose. I just want to give the idea of what's going on. Now, it always is going to dry lighter, so I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to say that this is where the light's coming, so this side's a little bit lighter. So, but I could, if I don't like the lines, if I feel like they're too harsh, I could always soften them up with just a little bit of clear water. But I like to let it dry a little bit first because it always dries lighter. So keep that in mind. Now here, the purple touched in this, and I like that. I like that it just mixes and mingles. I don't mind that a little bit. If that was like an orange color or, something that didn't go with what I was trying to do, that's why it's nice to keep the colors close, because that way, if you do have some mixes and mingles, like I'm going to wait for my green until the end because I don't want that doing mixing and one's pretty, that one's pretty dark already. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can lift up some shapes. Instead of putting darker, I'm going to go ahead and just lift with a clean brush, clean damp brush. I'm just lifting up some shapes to give it a little dimension. See how that now looks like a rose? All I had to do was lift up some interesting, lift up some C's instead of laying them down. This one I'm going to do the same thing with. It's because it just went down darker. So let's see. I can lift up some of that. Might be too dry. Now you can go in with a gel pen or something like that, or some gouache or acrylic paints if you're okay with mixed media, because once you add something else, then it becomes mixed media. So if you're okay with that, then you can, put in some highlights later. Now I'm using the paint that's already on there. I'm going in there with a clean brush for this guy, and I'm using the paint that's down there to just create these lighter spikes behind. So I'm just lifting a little bit of that paint and just creating some like additional shapes. I don't even have to add any paint. Or yeah. Now the other thing we can do is using an old credit card. You can actually create, if you want, little spiky shapes in there, you can use the corner and then just create, a little, you know, scrape it a little bit. If it's still wet, sometimes it'll lift the color. And then this is over another rose over there. I think that's a little bit more dark than I want. So I'm just going to lift that right up. Just laid it down a little bit too dark and too much. So brought that back up, and now I'm gonna just have a little bit more watered down. Trying to have you guys see where I mix too. I'm going to soften these lines up a little bit, just with a clean, damp. Let's see, let's do this guy. All right, and I want to have some little filler flowers in this area. There is something right here. There is something on my inspiration piece. There's like something coming out here. So just gonna make these little buds. I don't have a lot of shape. And then there's some of these guys over here too. And I'm gonna make this a little bit more pronounced. All right. All right, now I want to bring the darkest shade that I'm going to do for my flowers for some of the centers. And I'm going to mix a little bit of indigo with my lizard and crimson and just create a nice deep shade. I'm going to be very light with this. I don't want too much. I'm using this for my little stems for these sprays of flowers too. All right. Now I'm going to be doing some fillers with the green, and I want to be really careful not to touch anything that's wet. I'm going to soften up some of these dark lines a little bit first. This one's mostly green. Okay, so these ones have a really limey green in the center. Use this as my, I think this is sunlit green. I can't see it on my palette. It's a really bright limey green. And there's just green a little bit everywhere. So I'm just going to go in and fill in some green leaves, green sprigs, just whatever I see that's in there. Trying not to especially touch anything that might be wet in my pink areas. Giving them plenty of time to dry. Just starting with the lightest of the greens. Now leave some space in between, just a little bit of white space. Try to leave between each of the flowers, so they're not like the green's not necessarily right up against it. Some areas it might make sense to do that, but try to leave some space in between. Got a little bit too much water in this one, so I'm just trying to lift a little bit of that. I think I will try to, especially in the middle, I might go ahead and try to define, like put some dark spaces behind this guy just to fill that in, but it's gonna look well or not. So Now, if I want to make a base, should kind of cut it off a little bit, but the base is, is clear. So what I could do is create a gray, create a shape, some shapes behind it a little bit. So I might put something in. Table. Page here. Let me bring this up. Now, if I want, I can even put some little details on the leaves. You just decide how you want to go with the details. If they're wet at all, though, it's going to bleed out. So just if you want really sharp details, just make sure to let it dry. If you want subtle details, you could work on it while it's still a little bit wet. I don't know if I can bring back, I want to put this little green, it's like a little green thing in the middle there. And I don't know if it's going to show up because I've already got it too dark down there, but I'm going to try to add a little bit of white to my sunlight and see if I can get just a little highlight. A little bit. That's weird shape for it. I'm just trying to make that disappear. All right, I think I'm gonna of course, it always looks better once you take your paint off or your tape off. I mean, now I always like to leave my things for a day and then I come back and I tinker with it if I feel like there's any final details that I need. But I find that it's nice if I don't try to do everything in one sitting because I just can come at it from a new perspective. So I like to stop before I work it too much, and then I'll come back in and I can always add little details here and there. But sometimes you just get into the zen of just working on it and you don't want to stop. And sometimes you just have to make yourself stop because you can overwork it for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. There's my little spring collage or spring bouquet. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Healing Art After Hours. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, or share if you find this content helpful. And as always, happy creating. Bye.